talking 6'2", 6 foot, or even 5'10". Spud stood at 167.64 centimeters, or as we know it, 5'6". There's been just under 5,000 people to ever play in an NBA game, and only 4 of them have been 5'6" or below. And yes, there were guys like 𝗙𝗿𝗃𝗃𝗲𝗿𝗿 and 𝗙𝗶𝘃𝗃𝗃𝗲𝗿 who are even shorter than him. And those guys are absolute dogs in their own right.
Long ball to get in the second round. Final dunk now. Woo! And Spud Webb comes through in the clutch to put the pressure on Dominique. And another 50 for Spud Webb. Dominique Wilkins. Do or die right here. I don't think so, John. That was impressive, but I don't think that was 50. Oh, how people love the underdog. 49, 48, our new slam dunk champion with an incredible upset, Spud Webb.
This will never happen again. Just so we're clear here, this is Spud Webb, a crafty guy who is putting up 15 and 7 some years. On paper, he had a good, but relatively average career. But to the eye, the things that this man was doing was anything but ordinary. Because if you couldn't tell, Spud Webb was a little bit shorter than the average NBA player. Now I'm not talking 6'2", 6 foot, or even 5'10". Spud stood at 167.64 centimeters, or as we know it, 5'6". Now it doesn't really take a genius to understand that it's astronomically rare to be able to make the NBA at this height. But exactly how rare is it? Well, there's been just under 5,000 people to ever play in an NBA game, and only 4 of them have been 5'6" or below. And yes, there were guys like 𝗙𝗿𝗃𝗃𝗲𝗿𝗿 and 𝗙𝗿𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗲𝗿 who are even shorter than him. And those guys are absolute dogs in their own right. But for this elf to not only make the NBA, play 14 solid seasons, but win the dunk contest against the best dunker on the planet at the time, yeah, this is never gonna happen again. As I was watching the 5'6" guard win the dunk contest, I couldn't help but think to myself, compared to the league today, a lot of these guys are just simply not good at dunking. In fact, as I was watching the dunks from the OGs, I happened to stumble across this clip. Wait, did you hear that? Now my ears could be fooling me, but it sounded like a fan requesting a contestant to do a fucking windmill. And this wasn't even just any random contestant. This was Dr. J, who at this point was considered the greatest dunker of all time. Imagine going to the dunk contest to watch prime Blake Griffin, and instead of watching him dunk over cars, you can only hope to see him do a windmill. Yeah, never. Now as crazy as that sounds today, just barely 40 years ago, fans could only hope to see that type of a move, even from the best dunker on the entire planet at the time. So this got me thinking, what's with all the newly spawned dunking ability? Is it from players practicing dunks more than the old guys? Is it from new science that's come out to increase the ability of jumping? Or are the guys of today just simply stronger and more athletic? In short, I would say it's a healthy mix of everything. But if the players of today are making the guys of 40 years ago look ancient, then what will future players make our players today look like? By 2050, will the highlights that are considered legendary today end up fading into the norm? Or what if it's only a matter of time until Steph Curry's shooting ability becomes a new benchmark for the average sharpshooter? Will there come a day where the new players make the athleticism from LeBron and Giannis look normal? As weird as it sounds, based on what we've seen in the past few decades, I'd say it's inevitable. But what if there's a ceiling, a peak to human capability, where athletes just simply can't reach new heights? Will we ever see one? And if so, how close are we to it? Are guys like Mike and LeBron truly anomalies, or we'll never see their greatness rivaled again? Or would a more realistic lens show us that we're likely to see a player ascend their greatness? And it might even be within the next 10 to 20 years. As of today, Mike and LeBron are the pinnacle of basketball. But don't get me wrong, both of them don't come without their flaws. Take LeBron for example, a freak of a player, the definition of an anomaly. But he still gets a ton of flack in the GOAT debate for his finals record and what seems to be a constant need to craft up a super team. And Mike, you ain't perfect either. We all know you were playing against substitute teachers and plumbers, but in all seriousness, I don't think it's crazy to say that by 2050, the league will see a player with more basketball ability while simultaneously having less blemishes on their career. And even if somehow, players today are approaching the peak of basketball capability, with the current pace of rule changes and the league's obvious desire to push a more offensive brand of basketball, I think, unless there's a shift on the defensive side of the game, it's fair to expect some of the top players in the future to put up numbers that we haven't seen in a very long time. For example, since the year 2000, these are all of the rule changes that we've seen, which have either made it easier for the offensive side of the game or increased the pace of play, which in result ends up with more buckets. Although most of these rules might seem obsolete in the grand scheme of things, you can't argue that over time, they've made an impactful difference on the game. In fact, we can actually see this by looking at the numbers put up in the year 2000. At this time, the league averaged 95 points per game, playing with a much slower pace and a style of play that was much less reliant on threes and way more focused on defense. Fast forward just 20 years, and with the league's direct attempt to focus on offense, teams are now putting up 115 points per game this year. So at this pace, unless the league implements rules to help out defense, by the year 2050, teams are mathematically projected to be putting up to 140 points per game. Now I'm not going to say that this is actually going to happen. I do have faith that the league will find a breaking point and eventually begin implementing more rules to balance itself out on the defensive side of the game. But even if the offense progresses at half of its current rate, with the direction that the league is heading, paralleled with the fact that with time, players are only going to get better offensively, I think it's safe to say that by 2050, fans will have to get used to the best scorers in the league approaching 40 points per game. But trust me, I do know a lot of this is speculation. However, there are some numbers to back up an outlandish statement like this. Just under 15 years ago, in the year 2011, the top 5 scorers averaged a combined point total of just barely over 26 points a game, while today, they're putting up just under 31 points a game. That same year, teams averaged 92 possessions per 48 minutes, compared to 100.5, which is the league's average today. If this trend keeps up, in combination with the fact that players are also just simply getting better offensively, the sky is truly the limit in terms of what numbers superstars might be averaging in the year 2050. But if the boundaries of what's possible on an NBA court keep getting pushed, wouldn't this mean that records that are currently viewed as unbreakable will one day be broken? Let's break down some records that currently seem untouchable, but could one day be taken over by the future of the league, while comparing them to records that no matter how good players get, or what kind of insane numbers the league is putting up, will forever stand the test of time. The first record that I surprisingly think might have the best chance of being broken by 2050 is Michael Jordan's career points per game. Now, since the last 4 minutes of this video has been me rambling about the numbers that future players might be putting up, I'm not going to go into why I think this record will one day be broken. However, a record that I think will never be broken unless a literal demigod joins the league is Wilt Chamberlain's career 23,924 rebounds. To put this in perspective, the league's current rebound leader is Karl Anthony Towns, who's having by far his best rebounding year, putting up a staggering 25 and 14 a game. At his current average of about 64 games a year, it would take Karl putting up his peak rebounding numbers from his very first game in the league all the way until he's 47 years old, just to finally sniff Wilt's record. Now, I might be a hater, but for some reason, I don't think this is going to happen. However, something I do see happening one day is the Nuggets and Pistons record for most points in a game being broken. They currently hold the record for 290 combined points in one night. That is, of course, until they went into triple overtime. Yeah, they ended up with 370. But as crazy as it sounds, considering the pace that teams should be scoring at in the near future, I actually think that by 2050, this record has a chance of being broken. And it actually almost happened last year, when the Clippers and Kings combined for a whopping 351 points. All the Clippers had to do was score one more point, and they would have sent the game into a third overtime, where they would have been well ahead of pace to finally beat the 41-year-old record. But on an even crazier note, Kawhi Leonard put up 46 minutes this game, and that right there is a personal record that he's never gonna break. Speaking of record-breaking minutes, I can promise you that with the league's current load management ideology, Dale Ellis's record of 69 minutes in a game is not getting touched by any future players. But a record that I do believe will fall into the hands of a future superstar is the most infamous record in NBA history. The most points scored in a game by a single player. Now for the longest time, I thought this record would forever be unattainable. But say the league is around for another, 200 years. With 2,460 combined games played each year. After 200 years, that would be just under 500,000 games played. Call me crazy, but surely from a volume standpoint, I think one day the stars will align, and someone will go out there and finally drop triple digits again. Now trust me, I do understand why people think that this record will never be broken. But think about it. Just 40 years ago, people never thought that the league's future role players would be dunking better than who they believed to be the greatest dunker of all time. It was just 10 years ago that many people thought that nobody would ever be a greater shooter than Ray Allen. And even just a few years ago, people thought that a guy like Kevin Durant, a 7-footer with guard-like skills, who could shoot like no other, was a once-in-a-lifetime player archetype that we'd never see again. And now, we have this alien. So I think it's safe to say that although we may have our thoughts and predictions, no one will truly know what the future of the league is capable of.